guys, welcome back here to today's edition of Intuitive Angling, and thanks for joining me for the video today. Appreciate you guys coming around. And guys, today we're going to be talking about fishing a Squarebill crankbait in the springtime of the year, which is not as simple as it sounds. It's like when you talk about fishing squarebills in the spring, you haven't even touched the surface on the complexity behind this, because we've been talking about spring fishing a lot the last month on the channel. And spring is the most complex, complicated time of year to fish, because you actually have like sub-seasons within the season. Like in the pre-spawn period, you got the early pre-spawn, the mid pre-spawn, the late pre-spawn. You got the actual spawn, then you have the early post-spawn, the mid post-spawn, and the late post-spawn. And every one of these little areas, you know, we're talking usually about 2 to 3 week windows here. The bass are in a certain mood and personality, and they prefer certain lures. So there are some small windows where these crankbaits, the Squarebill crankbaits, will work good in the springtime. I'm gonna identify what those primary windows are so you can specifically narrow it down to when you need to throw this bait. And also, guys, we're gonna be talking about my favorite Squarebill crankbait, which is the Megabass S-Crank here, guys. I helped design this bait for Megabass several years ago. Absolutely, in my opinion, the finest Squarebill crankbait on the market there is. I'll put the S-Crank link and my Tackle Warehouse link in this video description if you guys like to pick up a few. This is the 2.0, which is the biggest one they make, but fish catching son of a gun here, definitely. And also, guys, real quick, anybody interested in booking a private on-the-water lesson with me, just go to my Facebook page, Intuitive Angling with Randy Blaukat, and shoot me a private message. I do my lessons here for anything you want to learn about bass fishing, I can teach you. Stockton Lake, Table Rock Lake, primarily. Of course, I don't give lessons on forward-facing sonar, but every other thing I can teach you about. So look forward to hearing from you guys there. Okay, guys, Squarebills have been around forever. This is one of the oldest lure categories there is because the Squarebill started back in the early 70s with the Big O. The Big O was like a big deal in the 70s. It's like it was a hand-carved Squarebill, and a lot of guys were paying $100 a piece for them back in the 70s, and they won a bunch of tournaments. And then after the Big O, that hand-carved Big O gained fame, that's when Bagley started coming out with the Squarebill crankbait, the Balsa B. And the Balsa B has been around forever. It's still a great fish catcher. It's a balsa lure just like this. Well, I've actually got one here. I'll show you what the Balsa B looks like. This is the original Balsa B right here. This bait's probably 45 years old. So you can see it's pretty much unchanged. I mean, it was way ahead of its time, you know, for this lure being back in 1980. So they've been catching them forever on Squarebills. Okay, and of course the difference is like when you're talking about a balsa wood Squarebill, like the Balsa B versus like the Megabass, it's got a lot more attention to detail, better paint, balancer systems. There's been a lot of improvements in the technology of the bait. Okay, now let's get into this whole thing about talking about, you know, where you want to fish it and how you want to fish it, and the situations it works in. Now for me, the Squarebill crankbait, so much of it is going to be about your cover and your water clarity. You can catch bass on a Squarebill crankbait all through the spring if you have dirty water. So this is sort of an exception to the rule. Water clarity plays a big impact on this. So if you have dirty water, like water visibility, you know, sort of in that 12-inch range, like a foot of visibility, you can catch bass on a Squarebill crankbait basically anytime the water's over 50 degrees and even warmer. All through the summer, everything. It's gonna work. And that's obviously good. Certain times are gonna be better than others, but dirty water, Squarebill cranking, especially if you have a mix of rock and wood, is gonna work all throughout the spring. But the best Squarebill cranking that I have found, in my own opinion, is when you have a little bit cleaner water, where you have these windows. So I like, personally, my Squarebill cranking, if I wanna really capitalize on these windows I'm talking about, I wanna have about probably 1.5 to 2 foot of visibility. There's a big difference between 2 foot of visibility and 1 foot of visibility on a Squarebill, but as far as how the fish react to it, it makes a huge difference. So here's what you wanna look for if you have water visibility over 1 foot, which there's not a lot of lakes that have a lot of water, you know, clarity under 12 inches. Most lakes across the country are they're gonna fall in that 1 to 2 foot, maybe 3 foot depth zone range for Squarebill cranking. So this is what I'm talking about here, about this technique for a little bit cleaner water is going to work anytime the water visibility is between like 1 and 3 feet. So that's going to be the sort of the baseline for it. When the Squarebill crankbait works the best in this situation, there's two different windows. One is during the pre-spawn period when the water temperature is between, like, specifically say 54 to 58 degrees. If you have 54 to 58 degree water and you've got water visibility between 1 to 3 foot, if you get a day out there, especially that's got quite a bit of wind and some low light conditions, you can light them up on a Squarebill crankbait. That's a perfect situation for that. Colors just depend. I use a lot of the brighter chartreuses this time of year, so maybe some of the crawdad patterns. In the summertime, I go to more of the shads, but I stay with more of my chartreuses, blackback chartreuse side, and those crawdad patterns during this phase of the pre-spawn. Now that's going to work and it's going to be very situational, but probably my favorite time to fish a Squarebill crankbait in the springtime is in the mid part of the post-spawn. So this is how you identify that. The mid part of the post-spawn is going to be that period after the bass are pretty much done spawning, probably 2 to 3 weeks after all the bass are done spawning. So when you say, for example, you go into a cove and you've seen some bass spawning, and then you go back there a couple weeks later and there's nothing but empty beds and there's no visible signs of the bass, pretty much they're done spawning. Another 2 weeks later after that, that is when the Squarebill cranking really gets good. And basically what you want to do is you want to find those same type of water clarities we're talking about, 1 to 3 foot, and you want to find some type of a rock or wood mix. I prefer rock. Rock can be any size. It can be gravel, it can be fist-sized rock, it can be larger rock, it can be bluff banks. But one of my favorite ways to catch them, guys, is to get like back in a major creek arm. Water temperature is going to be probably 70, low 70s, something like that. Water visibility 1 to 3 foot. And if I can get a day that's got some wind, I don't care about the clouds that much. It can be sunny, but I just want some wind. If I get that type of situation, that's when you can really whack them on a Squarebill crankbait. You can do really good under those conditions if you fish the bait right. Now here's how you fish it. Number one, you've got to use a medium fast stop and go retrieve that is very erratic. This is the key. And it borders on the faster side. So, if I'm talking about a medium fast retrieve, it's more like a fast retrieve, not like a burning fast, but faster than you would normally reel it with a stop and go retrieve to generate those post-spawn reactions. Sorry about that, guys. I had my storage went full on my phone. I had to start the video again, but anyway, I'm going to a little bit lighter line there. When I'm talking about lighter, I'm talking about 15 to 17 pound tests, because in that situation, guys, sometimes I want that Squarebill crankbait to go a little bit deeper. So let's say, for example, if I'm fishing a riprap bank or chunk rocky type bank, I want that bait to be able to go down in that 4 to 5 foot range. I find that those post-spawn fish on those rocky banks, even if the water's a little bit dirtier, sometimes are a little bit deeper. They like to hang down into that 4 to 5 foot range. And if I put it on 20 pound tests, which I do a lot when I'm fishing like around lay down logs and stuff, I can't get it down deep enough. So I'm normally using it 15 pound test, Seagar and VizX, a fast stop and go retrieve with a parallel cast. This is the key with it. And guys, some of the best strings of bass I've caught in May have come like this, especially on riprap. Guys, we talk about riprap a lot on the channel, but throwing a big Squarebill crankbait on a riprap bank in May is a great way to catch quality bass. But I can't reiterate enough how you have to use this aggressive retrieve, this fast stop and go retrieve. And also it will help you when you throw that crankbait out there, that Squarebill, point your rod tip right at the crankbait. Don't put your rod tip off at an angle. If you point it right at the crankbait and you do that stop and go retrieve, that bait reacts a lot more because you don't have any give in the rod tip. So point that rod tip right at the bait with a fast stop and go retrieve. And guys, it'll generate a good strike. I mean, it's a really good way to catch them. But I've caught them, guys, on this dune all over the country. I mean, during this time frame, it's a really, really good way to catch them. It's also a really good way to catch quality fish. I mean, quality fish will bite that Squarebill crankbait under those right conditions. So anyway, guys, just wanted to throw that out there. It's just another little tidbit of information you can add to your bass fishing arsenal, and hope it helps you catch some good ones, and we'll talk later.